detective. Right? I mean, that's kind of easy. That's all. Okay, there we go. And he's a popular national speaker, best-selling author. He continues to consult on cold case investigations while serving as a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. He is also an adjunct professor of apologetics at Biola University and a faculty member at Summit, which is actually how we got him to come speak for us this time, other than he's a friend and he says yes because he likes us, hopefully. But he's speaking up at Summit Ministries. And if you don't know about that and you have teenagers or grandkids that are that teen years, you should check it out. And I'll post a link on all the things that I mentioned tonight. I'll post a link on the email that I'll send out this week. So you want to get on the email. Once again, a plug for the email. Jay Warner was a conscientious and vocal atheist until the age of 35, when he took a serious and expansive look at the evidence for Christian worldview and determined that Christianity was true. After becoming a Christ follower in 1996, Jim continued to take an evidential approach to truth as he examined the Christian worldview. He eventually earned a master's degree in theological studies from Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary. He runs Cold Case Christianity website, blog, and podcast. He has written 3 books, Cold Case Christianity, God's Crime Scene, and Forensic Faith. Do these need to go in an order? No, not any particular order, just order one. And I told him, you're welcome. Order 3 is actually what I should say. Okay, he's also adapted, this is interesting too for you guys with young kids, he's also adapted Cold Case Christianity for the younger audience. And my girls have gone through it and they think it's great. And partly because, I mean, they think Jim is pretty awesome. Although I think his wife is even more awesome than Susie. And he can't keep up with her running, is the rumor, but that's okay. So he is married to Susie, the love of his life. They've been married since 1979. That's a long time.
It's a long time.
That's a long time. You're so young, though. You're so young. You got married in your teens. And they have 4 children. They live in Southern California, where he enjoys running on the beach and trails and walking his trusty corgi. Is that how you say that?
That's right.
Yes. So, welcome.
You know, I was not a Christian because I just didn't think it was reasonable. And the only Christians I knew working the cases I worked were in 2 categories. One, they were either officers, because a lot of our cases are team cases where we work them as a team. And if you like cold case work, these are just homicides, right? There's no statute of limitations on a homicide. These stay open, they don't close. So my cases have been featured on Dateline. I think almost all of them have been featured on Dateline. As a matter of fact, we have another one coming up a week from Friday. I'm not even sure the name this is going to be. It's the newest one, and it'll be on June 29th. So if you like Dateline and you've watched Dateline, you've probably seen some of our cases. And the groups of Christians that I knew were either police officers, and if you asked them why Christianity was true, they had really lame answers. Right? I mean, you could ask them, why do you think this guy's our suspect? They could give you a great answer. They could make a 10-point case for why this is the guy. But you'd ask them, give me 5 reasons why you trust the New Testament. They couldn't do it. So I thought, okay, I don't want to be part of that group. And the other group of Christians I met were the ones we were taking to jail. I don't want to be part of that group either. So I stayed out of it. I just did not think it was something that was worth my time, because I just didn't think it was reasonable. Now, my son is doing the same work that I did for years, and he has the same name tag, because we use the same name over and over and over again. So his name is Jim Wallace, okay? And he's wearing pretty much the same uniform that I wore. The patches are a little bit different. He's using the same tools I used before him. I use the same tools my dad used with the same name tag he has. He also is named Jim Wallace. We've been at the same agency with that name tag for 57 years. So if you called our agency in that period of time, there's been someone there to answer the phone named Jim Wallace. Okay? Now, I want to share with you, I was asked about a year and a half ago to do a short scene in a movie called God's Not Dead 2. Now, I will tell you that we had 6 minutes, and I'm sure that the producers of this movie wanted us to be able to make Christianity sound reasonable. And I didn't have a problem with that because I think it is reasonable. But I want to share with you why I think it's reasonable. We had a death in our city a number of years ago, and it was somebody we knew. She was a drug addict, and this was her nightstand when we arrived at her house. She was a very committed heroin addict, and you can see she's got hair, while you get a close-up of this. Here's the heroin needles, here and here and here. And she also smoked rock cocaine at the same time, so here are all the rock pipes, okay? That combination can be deadly, right? And she'd been doing this for years. I had actually taken her to jail for bank robbery years before this. So we all knew who this woman was. And then we get this call that she's dead in her bed, and we respond and we see this nightstand. What do you think the first thing we thought was? Overdose, right? So the officers are there, they're in uniform, they're waiting for the coroner to show up, right? Because the coroner's got to investigate suspicious deaths. So you have to wait a long time in Los Angeles County for a coroner. We're behind, okay? We got dead bodies all over the place. So it takes about an hour 20 minutes for someone to get there. And they just stand around and wait for the investigator to get there. And the investigator finally gets there and pulls down the blankets, and she's been stabbed to death. It's not an overdose. The officers they were talking to each other for that entire time, never even bothered to pull the blankets down. Why? Because they thought they knew the answer before they got there. As a matter of fact, when they were dispatched to this, on the way there, they figured, well, it's about time. And then they get there, and they're looking at the evidence based on their presuppositions. Everything seemed to fit. If you're not careful, what you think you know before you start can actually keep you from getting to the truth, because your presuppositions can color the way you look at evidence. You either miss something, don't look at something, or you misinterpret something. Does that make sense? What we're trying to do is figure out, in every one of these death scenes, what is the most reasonable explanation, because that is the judicial standard. By the way, it's not beyond a possible doubt, because if it was beyond a possible doubt, we'd never convict anybody. It's what's beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's a lower standard. Anything and everything is possible. So if you ask me, is it possible that, yeah, of course, yes, I'll say yes, because anything is possible. But that's not the standard. The standard is reasonable. That's a lower standard. I don't even care about what's possible. I only care about what's reasonable. That make sense? Now the question, of course, is how do we determine what's reasonable? And that's the skill set I want to teach you tonight. That means we're going to have to look at a dead body together. Ready? This is why if you invite a homicide detective to us. Okay? So let me show you what we're going to do. Now this dead guy is suspiciously like my son Jimmy. I'll just tell you that right now. Now I know you guys have Trader Joe's here. So you know that no one's going to kill a Trader Joe in They would starve if there wasn't a Trader Joe's. Okay? So we want to take care of these guys. And he did work there for a number of years. But when you walk into a death scene, you're trying to figure out, is this a crime scene? Because not every death scene is a crime scene. There's 4 ways to die, only one of them is criminal. And how we determine whether this is a crime scene is we use a process of reasoning to get to that. So let me show you what I mean. We make a list, 2 lists, that both begin with the letter E. The first list is a list of evidences. And then we make a list of explanations. Does that make sense? And we are trying to figure out which explanation is most reasonable, because everything's possible. But which is most reasonable given the evidence in the room? And so far, all we have in the room is a dead guy laying face down. And there's only 4 ways to explain dead guys laying face down. He could have died by some natural cause. He could have died by some accident. He could have killed himself. Or he could have been murdered. These are the 4 ways that people die. Now, what we're trying to figure out is, can I cross out any of these, given what evidence I have so far? What can I cross out? Because you can actually participate in this part of the program, okay? So what can I cross out? Yeah, really, I can't. As it is right now, if he had a heart attack, he would look like that. If he accidentally took too many pills, he would look like that. If he intentionally took too many pills, he would look like that. If I poisoned him with too many pills, he'd look like that. So right now, we can't do anything. So let's change the scenario slightly. What if he's a dead guy laying face down, but he now is in a pool of his own blood, center torso? Let's add that to our list. Okay.
Not natural.
Well, couldn't he have an aneurysm, hits the deck, and bleeds out through his nose? Yeah, that's right, because if it goes out of his nose, it'd be around his head.
Right.
And this is around his center. What natural opening in your center torso is going to allow that to happen? Okay, is it possible? Yeah, it's possible, but it's not reasonable. And I don't care about possible, so I can cross one out.
Well, maybe the forest tilted.
Yeah, maybe. Can I cross out anything else?
No.
Can I cross out anything else?
No.
Can I roll them over, right? See what that injury is before I can even assess what the next thing to cross out is. So let's change the scenario. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood, but now he's got a big honking knife sticking out of his back? I do this talk a number of different ways, and I kill him a different way every time. Tonight, he dies by stabbing. So here we go. Now I'm going to add that. See how you're already so morbid? You're laughing at a guy who's
Let's just circle homicide.
If you hang out with homicide cops for very long, you'll have a very sick sense of humor. All right, so now what can I cross out? Look, I mean, you can also give accidentally back to the knife is vertical in this. It's kind of hard. Is it possible? I think I can cross that out.
Suicide.
But look at where it is. It's low. I can even reach there.
Yeah, but you can't get a thrust.
But you, listen, I'm telling you, most of the suicides I go to, they are under the influence of something. Usually they're high. And I have seen some bizarre suicides. So this is very mild compared to some of the things I've seen. Did he really do that to himself? Well, yeah, because he's high. So I'm going to leave that in for now. But let's change the scenario. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in a pool of blood? He's got a knife in his back, but there are multiple steps. Why are you grimacing? I haven't even showed it to you yet. I didn't get a chance to show it. Okay? Multiple stab wounds in his upper back.
No.
Oh, now this
changes.
Now, unless he's incredibly flexible and has a high tolerance for pain, you can probably pull that out. Bloody footprints leading out of right? It's really hard to stab yourself multiple times in the back and then walk out of the room in your own blood. That's hard. Now we know we've got a homicide. So just so you know, nobody had to die in order for this to be illustrated for you. He's still alive. Okay? He's a police officer now, and you know he went to UCLA. I went to UCLA. We're both Bruins. My son David's a doctor. He went to USC. He's a communist. And the book I wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. And my background before I became a cop was I have a bachelor's degree in design and I have a master's degree in architecture from UCLA. So I get to draw my own illustrations. That's about all you get out of that. But this process of comparing a list of explanations to a list of evidences and then deciding which explanation is best given the evidences is a way of reasoning. It is called abductive reasoning. We ask jurors to do this at every criminal trial. And detectives do this at every death scene to figure out what we have. Now, I thought, could I take this approach to Christianity? Could I apply this to the most important claim made in Christianity, which is the claim of the resurrection? Because you know, this is what Paul says is the most important claim. If the resurrection didn't occur, it's game over. If you want to only examine one issue, this is it. Because Paul says if there's no resurrection, you have no hope of a resurrected body yourself. You're not going to be living after your death. Number one. Number two, he says, we have been lying to you. We're false witnesses, and you bought it. You're to be pitied for buying the lie. So I knew that all I needed to do to look at this worldview is first examine this one issue. Now, we could use abductive reasoning, but that means we have to make two lists. A list of evidences and a list of explanations. Now, what would qualify as evidence in the room? I think there were four things that I would have given. A friend of mine named Gary Hubman has written a little bit about this, but I didn't know Gary's work back then. I just knew that as an atheist, there were four things I would have said I believed about the resurrection, even though I did not believe Christianity was true. So I'm going to make a list of those four very simple things. First, I would have said, yes, I believe that Jesus was crucified and buried. I'm not a Jesus myth. If you've got that kind of a question afterwards, I'm happy to answer those. But this doesn't mean Christianity is true. People are being crucified every day. Did you know that's happening right now? Does not mean Christianity is true. You could be crucified on a cross, and get buried in a tomb, and then guess what? Doesn't mean that he rose from the dead. You can believe this is true, yet still believe Christianity is false, and I did. I believe that was probably true, but Christianity is still not true. I also would have said to you, yeah, the tomb is empty. But I don't think that means anything. You can empty a tomb a number of ways. By the way, if you want to end this in the 1st century, it's pretty easy. Get the body of Jesus and drag it around town. Okay, that's game over. Or get the eyewitnesses, alleged eyewitnesses, to recant. Those are the 2 things I would have tried to do. Now, they weren't able to show a body. That doesn't mean there wasn't a body. It says you have to get the body out of the tomb and dispose of it. You could believe these 2 things are true, yet think Christianity is false. I did. I can give you a 3rd thing. The disciples made claims. They might have even believed them. So what? All kinds of stupid people believe all kinds of crazy things. Doesn't mean it's true. And I would have said, yeah, it does appear that they were willing to really go out on a limb for what they believe. They seem to be pretty bold after the fact. So what? We see that today. These 4 things could be true, yet Christianity could still be false. But you've got to explain those 4 things. Now, I would have offered one of 6 explanations for these 4 things. I'll make a list here of these explanations. The first 6 on my list are atheist explanations. The last one, number 7, is the Christian explanation. Now, if I want proof that there's a God, okay, I teach a class at Biola on this topic. It takes 17 hours to teach it, okay? We could lock the doors right now. I can hold you here for 17 hours to make this case for you. But I'm not going to do that. Therefore, there is a God. So you see, I've already looked at But I will go a little further with you. I'm not going to talk about all these. We'll talk about a few of them, okay? As quickly as we can. We'll jump in. Now remember, every one of these explanations, like every explanation in any criminal trial I've ever worked, has strengths and has weaknesses. Even the true explanation that I believe is true as the prosecutor, that's got strengths and that's got weaknesses. We're trying to minimize the weaknesses in front of the jury, obviously. But we know that even the truth is going to have some unanswered questions. There's always unanswered questions in every case. Always. We just got to work through those. But don't expect there to ever be a case where all your questions can be answered. There just isn't. I've never had one. So let's take a look at a few of these. Here's the first one. What if they were wrong? The disciples were wrong. He wasn't really dead. If he's just looking bad and he's unconscious, you might think he's dead. And there seems to be some reason to believe that given the scripture, right? Because in the passage here in John, it says that he was executed along with 2 other guys. And when they came to get the bodies, the 2 other guys, they weren't dead. So they broke their legs to make sure they were dead. They didn't break Jesus' legs. Maybe he's not dead. They didn't make sure. They didn't break his leg. Now, they did stab him with a spear. And it brought forth the sudden flow of blood and water, which is really interesting. Because I think there's a hidden clue there. It's a hidden piece of science that nobody knew about in the 1st century. As a matter of fact, everyone who read this for the first 1,000 years could not explain the water. I get it. If you're hanging on a cross and I stab you with the spear, I'm going to see some blood come out. But why would there be water? So I don't care who the church father is who writes about this in the first 500 years, they deny that it's water. They think it's something else. It's got to be a metaphor for the Holy Spirit, or it's got to be a symbol. It couldn't be water, and I don't care which church father you read, and I read them all, when they're describing this passage of John's Gospel, they do not think it's water, because they don't understand the science of death. So if you're involved in a car accident and I get there before you die, or you're involved in an assault and I get there before you die, you'll see what happens to the body, right? It goes into circulatory shock. You start to kind of conserve resources, and you start to shut your body down to hopefully stay alive. Now, if your heart fails, you'll have to go into cardiac arrest. And if that happens, you'll suffer one of 2 forms of effusion. The first is called pericardial effusion. And what happens there is you get fluids and water around your heart. I've been to many autopsies where I've seen this, and trust me, it doesn't look like that. It's not that large. So if you stab that, you're not even going to see water separated because it's so close to the heart and there's so little water. But if you happen to be in the right position and the water collects in your lungs after cardiac arrest, that's called pleural effusion. Now there, if you stab that chest cavity, you will see a separation of blood and water. But it indicates you're already done. You've already suffered a cardiac arrest. Nobody understood that when John wrote it. Now John could just be really clever. I'm going to write down this unknown fact about biology that no one is probably not doing that. Probably just describing what he saw. But what he saw indicates to me that I think Jesus is dead. But if it wasn't that fact, it would be another fact. How many of you here have to handle for a living dead bodies? Some of you do. Raise your hand if you handle dead bodies for a living. Okay, so you already know what I know, which is that dead bodies do not look like unconscious actors or actors with their eyes closed. They don't look that way. They don't feel that way. They don't respond that way. When you manipulate dead bodies, you know they're dead. They're not just playing dead. They're not unconscious. You know the difference if you handle dead bodies. Now the problem is, hardly anyone in this room handles dead bodies. But in the first century, everyone handled dead bodies. You couldn't call a coroner. There wasn't one. You couldn't call the mortuary. There wasn't one. You took care of your own. And that's what was happening here. And I think these people would not have missed the signs of death. But I'm going to teach you these signs so you won't miss them in the future, okay? This is the Los Angeles Coroner's Office. It's in North Mission Road in Los Angeles, city of Los Angeles. You walk up this door, right here are the steps. You go in this door, you make a right-hand turn. Behind this window, it's about 4 windows long, is the Los Angeles County Coroner's Gift Shop. It's called Skeletons in the Closet. So if you want, you can Google it because you can order stuff online. Okay? You can get really cool things like this t-shirt that says, "Our bodies of work speak for themselves." Or you can get this mouse pad that says, "We're dying for your business." So there it is, Los Angeles County Department of the Coroner, Skeletons in the Closet. So there it is. Now, next door to this building is the examination building. And if you go in the basement of that building, it looks nothing like this. I wish it looked like this. Maybe it looked like that the first day. But since then, thousands and thousands of bodies have been cut up on those tables. Okay? Now, if you are assigned a homicide in Los Angeles County, you have to be present at the autopsy. Because the coroner is not going to testify in court until he goes to trial. I have to testify for the coroner at the prelim. So I have to be there to watch what he does so I can testify for him. So I have been to hundreds of autopsies, and they are ridiculously disgusting. And I have one suit, it's just a coroner's suit. I put that suit on because you can't wear it after you wear it once because it stinks so bad in here. Because it's blood everywhere, right? And it's never, when I first started in the 80s, this was a wood table. Yeah, why is that bad? It's a sponge, right? It starts to suck up this stuff. It's terrible, it's disgusting, right? But there's a sign on the back wall, I'm not kidding you, behind this thing, there's a sign that says, "No eating in the examination." But there are 3 inconvenient things that happen when your heart stops beating that if you were in the first century, I think you would know. But you might not know them in the 21st century, so I'm going to teach it to you. It's called the mortis triad. The first thing that happens, and you guys know this if you work with dead bodies, is you start to lose your body temperature. You cool down. You don't feel the same anymore because you're usually going to be cooler to the touch. And of course, how long you're outside, what the temperature is outside, these things are going to have a factor. We actually measure internal organs for temperature to try to figure out time of death. But things cool down because you don't have hot blood coursing through your veins. Make sense? That's the first thing. That's called alber mortis. Also, you're going to get stiff, at least for a season, and that is called rigor mortis, which you probably have heard about. But the biggest giveaway, I think, is that once your heart stops pushing the blood, it's still going to move, but not based on the push of your heart. It's going to move based on the pull of gravity. So, depending on where you die, if you die laying on your back, when I get there and roll you over, your back is going to be purple and red because all the blood is kind of settled to the back of your... This is called liver mortis, or lividity. These are the 3 mortises in the mortis triad. Now, I think it's absolutely possible that he's not dead, and they missed all of this, and that was not water coming out from pleural effusion. That's definitely possible. I just don't think it's reasonable. So I knew I had to cross it out. Maybe they're just lying about this. And I know a lot of you are really fond of conspiracy theories, right? Like books in which conspiracy theory, you actually think in your head that you know of some successful conspiracies that have occurred in the United States in the last 2 decades. How many of you actually think you know of some? Raise your hand right now. Raise your hand. How many of you just like conspiracy? If you keep your hands up high, I want to see. Hands up. Don't be shy. Okay, you people are stupid, okay? Conspiracy. If you think you know of a successful conspiracy, it wasn't successful by definition. Right? A successful conspiracy you never catch. Also, they're really hard to pull off. Now, we've got to work a lot of conspiracies because anytime more than one person kills somebody, you're going to add that conspiracy charge. So I have to kind of figure out, do we have enough to add the conspiracy charge? And it turns out you have to have 5 things in place to pull off a conspiracy. I just learned this by working them, because if you're going to solve a conspiracy, you have to deconstruct the conspiracy with the same 5 principles. That makes sense? So I'm going to teach you how to pull off a lie. So is anyone here who's younger than, say, 13? Younger than 13, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you're younger than 13. Okay, great. You're younger than 13. Do you have any siblings? How many siblings do you have? Just one? Anybody here who's younger than 13 who has more than one sibling? Are you all in one family back here? Okay, how many siblings do you have?
3.
3? Okay, I'm going to use these guys if you don't mind. But I'll put you all together. If you want all together, you're going to commit a conspiracy. The 2 of you and the 3 of you. Okay, you ready? You got to have these 5 things in place. First, this is not rocket surgery, okay, as John always says. This is really simple stuff. You want to have the lowest number, if you can, of co-conspirators, because it's easier for 2 people to tell a lie than it is for 23. Make sense? So that means you guys can't do this 5D. You're going to have to do it with one other person. You pick a sibling, but you do it with one other person. If you do this, I'm going to teach you how to lie to your parents right now. The first thing you do before you tell a lie to your parents is you pick one other person to do it with. Got it? Here's the second thing you want to hold the conspiracy for the shortest possible period of time. It's easy to tell a lie and keep a secret for a day. It's harder to do it for a year. Right? Makes sense. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to tell a lie to your parents with your one other sibling, and then you're going to immediately kill that sibling. You have a short to long. Makes sense? Also, you want to have excellent communication between siblings. If you're not going to kill your sibling, you want to have excellent communication. Here's what's going to happen. One of your parents is going to jam you up, and they're going to ask you questions. And that means you're going to have good answers. And you got to tell your sibling, what did you tell Dad? He's going to need to know, or she's going to need to know all the details. Because if he's a good dad, he's going to get into the weeds on all these little details to see if your brother or sister can repeat the same story. So you better be able to call or talk to them somehow and tell them what you told your dad. Make sense? See, it's not rocket science. So here we go. 4th thing. You need the strongest possible family relation. That means you got siblings. You got 3 siblings. I guarantee you, you like one of them and hate the other one, right? I know you do. So you don't do this with the one you hate. Do this with the one you like. You got a better chance to get away with it. Make sense? Last thing. Are you ready? Last thing. If no one's pressuring you, you got a good chance. Because if no one's asking, no problem, no one's going to tell. Now, my point here is that if you think that the Christian story is a conspiracy, well, they have to have these 5 things in place. Then it's reasonable. But if it's not in place, it's not reasonable. It really isn't. So first of all, I just know that the number's too large. Because this is not a conspiracy being told by, John and Peter and James. That would be great if it was, but it's not what it is. There's at least, how many people are telling this thing? The disciples is a larger number, would you agree? In the upper room in Acts 1, you got 120. And in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says there are 500 people that the Corinthian church could talk to, all of whom saw the risen Christ on the same day, most of whom were still alive. That's a large number. It's too large. If all you told me is that you think there's a conspiracy involving 500 plus, I'm already out. But let's add to this. Let's give them a clue, okay? This is old school. That's the original board, okay? All you kids who went on some other board, that's a counterfeit. I will change this board. I will make it the area around where the disciples did their work. So I'll have the game pieces will be the disciples, okay? So argument clue starts with the first point I'm trying to make. Number 1, I think we get too many people. This is too large a group, if you ask me. But how long do they have to hold it? If it's short, you got a better chance of getting away with it. If it's like 6 minutes, no, it's not 6 minutes. 6 hours, 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, 6 decades. You want me to believe that 500 plus people, without anyone ever cracking, held this for 60 years. It's possible. Now, the next thing is, can they communicate with each other? Because they're all going to get jammed up. And they're not in this holy huddle here. They're all over the game board. So when Thomas is getting tortured here in India, how is he able to communicate with Matthew? How is he able to communicate with Paul or John? See the problem you have here? You don't have Snapchat and you can't text each other. And they're going to be asking questions. And it turns out the stories, regardless of how far they're separated from each other, they're all the same. All the details are the same. Nothing changes regardless of what region the story comes out of. That's the bigger problem. I think that's just too far. Okay, how about this? Are they under any pressure? You guys have played Clue. You guys ever watched 24, Jack Bauer? Not that new 24, try to reboot it. That's a terrible reboot. I'm talking about Jack Bauer. What Jack Bauer will do to get to the truth? Whatever it takes. And that's what was happening here. These guys were being tortured. Give it up. Thomas, listen. Matthew's already... Paul's drinking margaritas right now. Why would you keep holding on to this as he's cutting off his fingers? Think about this. This is the kind of pressure they're under. Too much pressure. And a couple of things. Now, are there some brother sets? Yeah, there are some brother sets. You got James and John, you got Peter and Andrew, but look at Matthew. Matthew's not even part of the clique who was with John the Baptist. Remember, Matthew is not part of this group. A lot of these guys knew each other. And they had this expectation of a Messiah. That's not Matthew. He's working as a tax collector. No one even likes this guy. He jumps in late. And he dies for a gospel he writes. Some would argue it's the first gospel. I think it's probably the second. But the point is, it's an early gospel. And finally, I just look at the entire scenario. I got to ask you the question: what is in it for these folks? This is too hard to break, and too easy to break, and nobody ever is broken. No one ever recants their story. I would think that I would at least see something early in history in which there's some doubt on the part of one of the eyewitnesses who changes his story. You never see that. So is it possible? Yeah, of course it's possible. It's just not reasonable. I'll go one more step with you before we kind of wrap it up here. I can't do all these. Maybe they just hallucinated this because they wanted Jesus to be alive so desperately after this whole thing happened that they would have seen almost anybody and thought it was Jesus. It does seem like Jesus is slightly different post-resurrection than he is before the crucifixion. Suddenly, look, you got someone like Mary. You don't think that she wanted Jesus to be alive? She's by herself in the tomb garden. And here she is. You know, she thinks she sees a gardener. Oh, it's Jesus. No, Mary, it's the gardener. You just want it to be Jesus because you're by yourself and you want it really bad. That seems reasonable to me. I think this is a way of explaining these appearances. Hey, you got someone like Peter. You don't think that Peter wanted Jesus to be alive? You got at least one account, too, here, where he's by himself when he sees Jesus. He could have imagined it. James is the same way, right? The brothers don't seem to treat Jesus all that well when he's alive. He probably felt bad about that. Now he gets a chance, he thinks it's Jesus. He's by himself. But then it gets weird, because right now you got this guy named Saul, who's on the road to Damascus, and he's by himself. But do you think that Paul wants Jesus to be alive so he envisions this? That's a harder sell, I think. Even though he is alone. And then it gets really weird, right? Because now you have accounts that go on for years, are told over and over and over again, by multiple eyewitnesses who say they saw the same thing. So here you have two on the road to Emmaus. Now look, if I told you I had a dream last night involving a red Tesla and Mulholland Drive, and you said, yeah, and it had a beige rag top, and the top was down, right? How would you know my dream? If you know my dream, that's going to freak me out, because we don't have group dreams, right? We don't. Those things are called memories, right? But here, is this a group dream? And it gets worse than this, because I got the three Marys here, right, in Matthew 28. Are they having a group dream? Then you have this situation where you have no Judas. Well, this is actually at the lake. I couldn't even get them all on the same. I tried to get them all on the same screen. I couldn't get them all on the same screen. So there are 7 here, 2 more over there. You have a 7-man group dream. How's this happen? And here, for example, you have no Judas, and you have no Thomas. In the upper room, we have 10. 10 who saw the same thing. And they tell the story for years to come. Now, you tell me, how are they having a group? Well, then Thomas comes back, so now we got 11, right? So now this group's getting larger. And so now we got 11 people here. And some of these you don't even know what the disciples, it could be disciples, could be the apostles plus the other disciples. It's not clear on some of these passages. So here, for example, where you have the disciples at the mountaintop, it's at least 11, but probably more. This is my favorite of all of them right here. This is when Jesus ascends into heaven. I suspect, honestly, forget about the resurrection. If you were just there and you saw Jesus ascend into heaven, I suspect that would be enough for some of you to become believers. That would be enough. Now, there's parts of people in this room who are either skeptical or got drugged here by a spouse or whatever, or a parent, and they're not sure if this whole thing is true. Well, I guarantee you this, if you saw Jesus ascend into heaven, your doubts would go away. You would actually believe. Do you want to see it? I can show it to you. You want to see it? Yeah. Want to see him ascend? You ready? You ready? Here it goes. There should be no unbeliever in the room. I saw it. We got at least 10 or 11 people here who saw it at the same time. Then you get that thing where Paul says there are 500 people who on the same day saw the same thing. How in the world? I tried to number this for you. It's not easy. I'm on there. You're mostly all of them. I got a few missing. Here, I'll put them down. There you go. If you doubted, if you said, you know what, this is a hallucination. I can understand why you want this. You imagined it. You couldn't have really seen this. Well, there's a way to fact check this, right? Because you could run back to the tomb. There ought to be a body in the tomb if all of these are just hallucinations. The problem is the tomb's empty. So now you're back to kind of some kind of conspiracy theory. So that's why I think kind of almost all this stuff rolls back to conspiracy theory. You already know why I don't believe that. So when it comes to the hallucination theory, I'm like, okay, is it possible? Look, this is why Peter says we're not making this stuff up. Look, we just saw it, okay? With our own eyes. So in the end, I have rules on that also because I know it's possible. And I always say it's possible. I'll never say no to it if it's possible. But it's not reasonable. Now we're going to skip all the way down to the bottom. But I will send you, I think I have a slide here to do that. I will send you a video of the entire talk. Okay, so you have it. But this is the Christian answer. This is the idea that the disciples are just telling the truth about what they really saw. They're just accurately reporting the resurrection. Now, okay, I told you when I started that every explanation you do in a case has strengths and weaknesses. All of these do. This has also got strengths. It does. I think it probably better than any other explanation. It doesn't count for those 4 pieces of evidence we started off with. Better than any other explanation. But it has, I thought, a deal-killing weakness as an atheist. There's a weakness to your Christian explanation that I thought you could not overcome. And the weakness is that it requires a supernatural act. That's the weakness. I don't care how good it is. It requires something crazy to happen. I don't believe in crazy things happening. I was what we would call a very committed philosophical naturalist. I don't believe in things that can't be explained with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. That's it. This would have to be explained some other way. So I rejected this. But wait a minute. What are we examining tonight? What is the thing we're studying, we're investigating? Aren't we really investigating this claim? We're investigating the claim that a supernatural act like the resurrection could ever be the most reasonable explanation from evidence. If you're going to start off by saying, well, no, I reject anything supernatural, then you're never going to be able to do this investigation. Because that's the question we're examining. Well, I don't believe in that. Well, yeah, I get it, but that's the question we're examining. You can't start off rejecting any, you won't be able to do anyone. Because that's the actual question. Is this ever reasonable? And if you're going to hold to this, and say, I don't care, I don't believe in anything supernatural, then I can show you evidence, and you will find a way to jump over it. Because you don't believe in anything supernatural. And I can show you, well, let me tell you, these are quoted very, if you go off the wall, I don't care, I don't believe in anything supernatural. Well, look, I can show you the archaeologists, but I don't care. I don't believe in anything supernatural. No matter what I show you then, you will find a way to jump over it. And you will end up in that position. And the reason why you're in that position is because that is where you started and you refuse to move. That is no way to do an investigation, I'll tell you right now. There's a reason why I showed you this picture. These guys thought they had the answer before they started. And therefore, they never moved. And they missed it. You don't start off thinking you know. Because you can't do an investigation that way. Right? Make sense? So when it comes down to the issue of the resurrection, you only have 2 choices, it seems to me. Either he rose from the grave or he didn't. That's really it. Now, if you'd have said to me, well, Jim, you need to have an open mind as an atheist, you need to consider all explanations, including supernatural explanations, I would have said, I'm sorry, I can't do that, because I got a roadblock. I don't believe in the supernatural. And that's going to prevent me from getting to that conclusion. Make sense? But if I offered you my kinds of explanations, just the natural explanations, if all I did was offer you those explanations, well, none of those work. They all are a roadblock. Those don't work. They just don't. And those are all the explanations that have ever been thought of. There's only 6. None of those work. And I didn't care. I'd have found a way to jump over those, or go around those, or go under those. I didn't care what I had to do because I wanted to get to that conclusion. Just look at these 2 trails for a second. Which of these 2 trails is least encumbered? Pretty obvious, right? And as it turns out, on this side, the only roadblock I put there. Right? I can take it down. That's me. I have that bias. I refuse, so I put that roadblock up there. But I can control that. Now, I can't control this stuff. Whether I like it or not doesn't work. But over there, it's only there because of me. If I was willing to simply lay down my bias against the supernatural, this is clearly the most reasonable explanation from evidence. So I realized at some point, the thing that was standing between me and the truth about this, or between me and the cross, between me and the gospel, was simply me. And it had always been me. And that's why I think you can take a reasonable approach to this, using a better reasoning, and you can overcome that kind of hurdle. Does that make sense? Now, before we take questions, I want to show you how you're going to get, this is our website, coldcasechristianity.com, and I've set up before the talk tonight a secret page. That secret page is here. So if you take one picture, this is it, and this is, you have to put this in your browser. You can't Google for this because it won't show up. It's a hidden page. But if you put that in your browser, you'll be able to get this video. I'm not here to sell you books, so I didn't bring books to sell. I'm here to get this information and take a step. And that means you're going to get, I know, right? That's part of the reason why, as an atheist, I thought, I always thought that Christians are only doing this because they want to sell you something. And God's got a sense of humor because years later, I'm a Christian selling a book. So I just learned that, to be honest with you, tonight, what we're going to do is just give you as much as we can give you. I've got all the PDF files for this talk. I'm going to give you those. I've got the video for this, all the MP3s for this. I'm going to send all that stuff to you, and you'll have it. Sign up for it quickly, though, because I'll probably send it to you by Friday. Okay? And Sarah, I'll send you the link also so you have it for anybody who wants it later on. All right, that being said, now we can take some questions.